Hey, this is Jason Millard. I'm doing another live video here on TikTok. I hope I get some people on here so I can answer some questions and talk about some things. I wanted to continue our conversation on why is the Bible so weird? There's a lot of weird stuff in the Bible, and that's what we've been talking about. But I'm willing to talk about anything else you want to talk about today. My book is out. Adam is God, Eve is us, strange stories about aliens, angels, and the love of God from the book of Genesis. And I have an upcoming book coming out here soon. It's called Puppies and Napalm, The Extra Dimensional Madness of the Prophets. That should be coming out by the summertime. And I cover a lot of these weird kind of things that you see in the Bible and, kind of talk about some of those things and try to give it kind of some context. One of my problems that I see is that a lot of times people really misunderstand a lot of stuff when it comes to, like Christianity, God, Bible, all that kind of stuff. It's sad because the people who are supposed to be showing us the truth about Jesus aren't. The people that are supposed to be the church, they're supposed to be the beacon, the light of the world, isn't. And it's sad, and I think it should change. And I think it starts when we decide to actually listen to what Jesus had to say. Because it's funny, because he's very different. Oops, excuse me, I need to turn that on. Okay, there we go. He's very different than most of the ways that you see American churches are, or Christians are. And specifically what I want to talk about, I want to talk about this really cool chapter in the book of Romans. And it's a chapter Christians like to throw around a lot. It's actually a chapter I got to write a paper on in college. So that's another reason I wanted to talk about it. But it's Romans chapter 13 is pretty well known for, it basically is Paul admonishing people to obey the government. And that at first reading, that's what it seems like. And then you go, well, wait a second, Paul. Paul was a fugitive. Constantly his whole life. He was on the run from the government. Even Jesus was a fugitive. Herod had basically was going after him, and he called Herod a fox, which is interesting because that word in it's written in the Greek, but it means a female dog. So it's kind of funny that that's what he called Herod. But Herod was the king, and Jesus wasn't obeying him. So there's all these different places in the Bible that you see where people are disobeying the authorities, the people that are in power. But then we got Romans 13. And Paul says to obey the authorities in power. And that's where it gets really, really interesting. Now, a lot of people would just say, well, obviously it's another reason why this whole book is a big book of myths. A lot of contradictions and a lot of, crazy stuff in there. That's not the case here. And that's something that when you don't really dig into the Bible and actually try to figure some of these things out, of course you're going to misunderstand it because the Bible is full of weird stories. And when you ignore the weird stories, it makes the Bible a lot nastier and meaner. For instance, and this is something I talk about in my book, if you haven't got it yet, Adam is God, Eve is us, strange stories about aliens, angels, and the love of God. I talk about the flood, and a lot of people know, all religions have some form, or almost all religions have some form of a worldwide flood. And, well, why did God flood the world? What was the reason behind it? And a lot of times people would say, oh, it's because people were bad. Okay, where'd you get that from? You went to church and they showed you a little flannel graph where you had, all these people wanting to go in the ark, but they couldn't because they were bad? No. By the time the ark was built and Noah and his family went into the ark, Noah and his family were the only 8 humans left on the planet. And I say humans. And I talk about things that are not human in my book, which I think is actually the most interesting part, is the not human part of it. And Genesis chapter 6 goes into it, and I go into it in my book as well. It's something strange in the Bible that if you misunderstand that first part in Genesis, you're going to misunderstand a bunch of other things, like a ton of other things. People think that God is going to torture people somewhere in a basement with fire. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's silly. I mean, people who believe that, they're weird. I mean, why would you want to serve a God who likes to torture children in a basement with fire? I mean, that's a horrible, horrible idea. But that's what you hear a lot of Christians preach this, teach this. And they teach, like I was just talking about with the flood, they'll teach a story where, God is trying to... It needs to cleanse the earth because of the evil that humans have made. And that's not the case. God loves humans, and God has never, ever, ever in all of history, is there anything that God has done to try to cause problems with humans? You know what God has done? God's always tried to get humans to listen to him, to love him. So in Genesis chapter 6, you see that these sons of God, that's the word that's used here in Genesis 6, they were coming down to the earth, and they were procreating with women. And I know it's a weird idea, but these creatures that were born were called Nephilim. When you read the Bible like an actual story, it makes so much more sense instead of just kind of picking a verse in a chapter and, this is what the Bible says. It's like you're missing the point. It's a story. So in this story, there was a group, there was this whole council of all these different gods, and you had the Almighty Yahweh, there's none like him in character or anything, but you had all these other creatures that he made. They call them the sons of God. I know some people like to use the word angels, which I don't like just giving them a generic angel. That's like saying all humans are UPS drivers. I mean, angels have a specific reason. But I mean, even in the Bible, there's seraphim, there's cherubim, there's the weird Ophrium. That's the crazy wheel with the eyeballs all over it in Ezekiel. So there's all of these weird stories in the Bible where you hear that God is, for instance, with the flood. Let's start with the flood. God's destroying the earth. Why? Because of the Nephilim, because of these evil creatures that were born to the sons of God and the daughters of men. And these creatures were devouring the whole earth. They were killing off all the humans. By the time the floods came about, there were no humans left. It was just Noah. And I go into that in my book, and I can just tell you one interesting scripture that kind of mentions that is in Genesis, where it's talking about Noah. It says Noah was blameless in his genealogies. He was without blemish in his genealogies. Well, basically what the Bible's saying there is that out of all the different humans in the world, they've all been corrupted, with the Nephilim. The Nephilim had destroyed most of the humans. They'd eat people, they'd eat anything. And it got to the point where there was only Noah. Noah and his family were the only ones untainted by this. Why is it important? Well, in Genesis chapter 3, you see that there was a promise given. Now, once again, like I said, read it like a story. Don't treat the Bible like some weird religious book that people like to, wave around when they yell at gay people. I mean, it's not that. Think of it for a second like a book. And while you're reading the book, there are beats to the story, all right? So if you don't follow the beats, then you're going to miss the whole story. If you didn't know in Lord of the Rings that the one ring, when put on your finger, turns you invisible and it attracts all the ring wraiths to come get you, if you didn't know that, then that whole thing, most of the movie, you're going to go, what's going on here? Why does it keep disappearing? You miss the point. You miss some important things that have to do with the actual storyline. And so God destroying the Nephilim and then judging the sons of God that did it. There's more information on that. There's a lot of books that the apostles and the disciples, probably Jesus as well, had read. And they actually quote, Jude and Peter both quote the book of Enoch. And I'm not saying the book of Enoch is like one of those books that should be in the Bible or something, but it has a historical significance. Jude quotes it, and quoting it to try to make a point about how God had sent judgment on the sons of God and the Nephilim. And if he didn't spare that world, then God is also going to judge the evil of this world. And how he does it, that's between him and the people he's going to judge. I personally don't like getting involved in that kind of stuff. When you start pointing fingers at people, well, it's like, the whole thing, you point one finger, you got four pointing back. I mean, Jesus said, judge not, lest you be judged. With the same, measure you judge someone, it's going to be judged to you. It's between them and God, how he judges them. But there will be judgment. Now, that's what Jude's trying to get to. So, in the book of Enoch, there's a story that talks about 200 of these sons of God, these, the actual word is Elohim. The word Elohim in the Bible, a lot of times people try to say, oh, that's a name of God. It's like saying God, like God, God. And it can mean anything. Elohim can mean anything that's not human. Because they were in the Bible, angels are referred to as Elohim. You've got to change the way you look at things before you start making judgments about the Bible, because a lot of times if you didn't read the story, if I never read Lord of the Rings or watched the movies or whatever, I don't have a right to give you I can give you my opinion, but it don't mean anything. Wasn't Sam and Frodo gay? I remember when the movie came out. I really want to talk about that. No. But like I said, if you don't know the movie and you don't know and understand how the thing works, then you're going to miss the whole story. So God, from the very beginning, was in a fight with the adversary, Satan. Okay. In Genesis 3, it refers to him as, I hate the English of this, a snake. That's not what the word means. Number one, there wasn't a snake. If supposedly snakes came about because of this, then, what does that mean? I think a lot of times English words refer to things that have already happened. And they really mess things up. So snake has the kind of sound. There you go. It doesn't mean that the devil or this thing in the garden was a talking animal. I mean, because people say, oh, that's ridiculous. Well, there's a lot of ridiculous things that you could think about when you read the Bible, but that's not the worst of them. But this thing, if you actually take the word that's used, it's actually a triple entendre, which it's a noun, it's a verb, and it's an adjective all at the same time, depending on how it's used. Some people interpret it as a shining ones, the shining ones. Some people interpret it as like a necromancer, like somebody who's doing sorcery to try to trick people, and some people, the deceivers in kind of tied in with that. So a lot of people think that this creature in the garden that spoke, that fell. I mean, number one, a lot of people don't realize in the story, I'm talking the story. I'm going to tell you the story of the Bible. I'm not going to tell you the stuff Christians tell you, because they're just going to pick out one scripture and try to make you think that you're bad because of their one scripture they picked out, and just totally miss the point. So in this story, you have this creature, probably a seraphim, or actually, you know what? Ezekiel calls him a cherubim, so I'm going to go with that. All right. So he's this type of higher angel, and or spiritual being, sons of God, whatever, Elohim, and he's sent to protect Adam and Eve in the garden. Well, while he's there, I don't know what happened, but something happened that changed his allegiance, where he no longer wanted to serve God and he wanted to start his own empire. And this wasn't the first one that did that. Like I said, 200 angels came down on Mount Hermon and made a pact, an oath, that they would go together and produce children with human women. So, and actually in the book of Enoch, it doesn't even mention a word like Lucifer or something like that, which that's a Latin word. Baal is mentioned in the Bible a lot more than some Satan figure. And I think that's where a lot of people miss the point too. It's like God and the devil. It's not like that. God is not in opposition with anyone. If you actually think the concept of God is so beyond us that when we start trying to define God that way and put him in this, it's a false dichotomy. It's like, oh, it's God and the devil. No, it's not. Number one, there were a lot of adversaries in the Old Testament and the New Testament. It depended on what they were dealing with. Paul referred to principalities, powers, mights, and dominion. Getting that, dig into that one. He's talking about these rulers, these sons of God in Psalms 82. And, well, actually, let's start. In Deuteronomy, God gave over the nations to the sons of God. And one of these creatures went into the garden, and he wanted to start his own agenda. Now, Eve, and remember, I told you this in my first chapter of my book, I talk about Adam is God and Eve is us. When you read the story, you've got to understand it saying more than what it's saying. Eve was deceived. Adam wasn't. Why? Because Eve was us and Adam represented God. But let me get back to the story. So when Eve and Adam chose to eat the fruit, it's basically the knowledge of good and evil. It's obtaining, creating the knowledge of good and evil, obtaining it like it's yours, it belongs to you. And they wanted to be their own gods, like this, this other fallen creature, this fallen angel, this fallen whatever. I believe, this is my opinion, there's nothing about this in the Bible, but there's enough in the Bible to say that when the devil was originally in the garden, he wasn't bad. It says he was perfect. Isaiah. I mean, they talk about the whole story, the fall of this rebel creature. And he was sent as a guardian and a protector of the garden. It says he was in the Garden of Eden. Perfect. So Garden of Eden was created, and you had a devil that was perfect. That means he was not doing anything wrong. What changed his mind? Probably the same thing that changed Adam and Eve. I think he probably ate the fruit before they did. And when he ate the fruit, he didn't die, and his eyes were open, and he's like, I'm going to be my own God. And he tells Eve, you're not going to die. It's interesting because the words that God said was, in the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. So I want to tell you something really cool. This is a little cool thing in the Bible. The Bible says, to God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. So Adam lived almost 1,000 years. So in the day that he ate the fruit, he died. But then there's more here, because see, God gives a promise to Eve. She would be the one that would bring the salvation of the world. Hey, if you're listening to me on this, I really want you to get this. God is not a man. Sorry. God is not a misogynist pig like most people are when it comes to the way that they try to preach God. There's a lot of really cool examples of God being like a mother hen, gathering her chicks under her wings. That's something Jesus said. So when you start trying to put gender on something that's beyond gender, you miss the point, all right? God chose a woman to save the world. I want that to soak in for a second. Paul said, and this is what I talk about in my book too, that women will be saved through childbearing. Women were very important. Why? Because eventually the Messiah, that's the word that the Jews use, it means the anointed one, the one specifically chosen to come and to rectify, to start a new kingdom, to get rid of that old kingdom, to take away the power that was given to these fallen angels to rule over the world, to take that back, to save everyone. This seed, this is what I love. The promise to Eve in Genesis chapter 3 was that a seed of a woman would crush the head of the serpent. Now, once again, we're talking, when you read the Bible, you gotta understand it's written by ancient people, okay? They have ancient ideas about how things work, all right? So when you're reading this and you come across some things, you're like, wait, what's that? It's like, yeah, that's how they understood it. And God dealt with them where they were. God will deal with you where you're at right now. He's not gonna expect you to be up here somewhere or do this or do that or whatever. He's gonna start where you're at, just like he started where he was at with everybody in the Bible. So he told Eve that her seed. Now, this is where it's interesting because, the concept of seed, the guy plants the seed, the girl has the baby. That's the way they looked at it. They thought if the girl's not having a baby, obviously the girl has a problem. She's barren. It's like, well, you didn't really think the guy's barren. So, but the seed of a woman, that means it had to be a woman that had nothing to do with a man, a virgin birth. Get that? Wow. The story, remember, beats in the story. You've got to follow the story. Each part of it has it's a story from start to finish. So in the beginning, in Genesis, God is setting up for this woman who would have a baby that was not from a man. It was not from the seed of a man. It was the seed of a woman. And this seed, this promised child, would crush the head of the serpent. Well, guess what? All of the demons and devils and principalities and powers and might and dominion and authority and all that kind of stuff, all the sons of God, all the Elohim, they all heard that. So if you're rebelling against God and you want to create your own kingdom on earth, you need to stop the thing that will crush your head. And what was that? It was the seed. So what did all these fallen angels try to do? What did all these fallen sons of God, these people that came down and procreate in Genesis 6, having sex with women, creating Nephilim, they wanted to corrupt the seed. You remember the promise was that a woman would have a baby. And that baby, without the help of man, a woman would have a baby, and that baby is going to save the world. It's going to crush the head of the serpent. And that serpent, the evil forces of this world don't want to be crushed. So they're going to fight against it. So one of the things they did, and here's a good example, is it started with Cain and Abel. When Eve had Cain, she literally says, Cain, this is it. Like, this is the one. This is the seed you promised, right, God? This is the one. And then after, Cain killed Abel and Cain took off, she had another baby, Seth. And I love it how in the Bible it says, and then she said, God has given me another one. So this is the other one. Is this, come on, is this seed? So they were looking from the very beginning to fix this problem. And then you find the devil, all these evil forces trying to corrupt the seed by having, remember, okay, I'm going to tell you something in Genesis chapter 3 says the seed of a woman would crush the head of the serpent, but the seed of the serpent would, it says, bruise the heel of this other seed. So there's a seed of woman, Jesus, right? The story, virgin birth, that's, Jesus. And then there's a seed of the serpent, which that's weird. That is just weird. And then we see, once it's a story, it's weird. You're like, whoa, what is that? And then you get to Genesis 6. Oh, so they're coming down and remember, old mentality, planting the seed, harvesting, okay, right? The guy plants the seed, the girl has the baby. They're like, well, let's go and screw around with all the women down there. If we put our own seed in all these women, then none of them are going to have the Messiah that's going to crush our head. And that's what they did. They came down. And it says God grieved, and it's one of these really powerful scriptures in the Bible. There's two really powerful scriptures that really has always stuck to me in my life. The one is in Genesis where it says he grieved that he made humans, and a lot of people read that and go, what is he saying? He wish he didn't make them because they're bad or mean or evil or nasty people? No, he was grieved because all of the Nephilim had just devoured them. And it says that, they have devoured everything that was left. And he says, I'm going to destroy them with the earth and bring about a flood. I love how he says he's going to destroy them with the earth because the Greek, this is getting a little deep, and I'm sorry. I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. This is really interesting. The Greek interpreted Nephilim. So in Genesis, you have the Septuagint, which is the Greek interpretation of the Old Testament, which is what Jesus probably used and all the disciples probably used. I mean, that's what most scholars think. In the Greek Septuagint, it's a weird word. Basically, the word Nephilim is translated gigantes. Now, that should sound familiar to some people. Gigantes, it actually means earthborn, and it's referring to like the Titans. It's referring to things that, they're not from Olympus. It's Greek, right? So it's not, we're talking Hercules. That's what we're talking here, okay? I want you to understand that. Earthborn. We're talking Hercules. What is Hercules? Hercules is literally a Nephilim. Think about that. Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a Nephilim. I mean, you could just go to right across the board and you can, all these different stories of these things. And some people are like, so what are you saying? You're saying mythology is true? No, but I'm saying it's part of the story. I don't know if there was ever some weird thing like any of this stuff that other religions talk about. I don't know. But I do know this story, and this story says that God destroyed all of these creatures, Nephilim, including the sons of God. And then Peter jumped in on this, which also, I said, going back to the book of Enoch, Peter says that that these creatures that were destroyed during the time of the flood, while God waited patiently, these creatures were kept bound in a place called Tartarus. I think I'm saying it right. Once again, another weird Greek word where the Titans are held. It's an abyss. It's this horrible place that's for gods. It's not for people. Yeah. So in the story, back to the story, this is part of the story. This is what happens. And then the Nephilim, they're destroyed. They're in the flood. And then you have Noah and his family, and they're restarting all over again. Well, as time goes on, you see all of these different things happening, all these different events that are going on. Now, you would think that after what happened with the flood, and in the story of the book of Enoch, you would think that these sons of God would never do that again, but they did. In Genesis 6, it actually says, and at that time there were Nephilim on the earth, and I'm gonna grab my Bible. I'm gonna grab a Bible real quick because I want to tell you about this. This is actually really, really cool. So let me go get my Bible. The one I'm waving around is the English Standard Version. I like that one the most. But what it says is that at that time there were Nephilim on the earth, and even afterwards. So it wasn't just at that time, there's afterwards. So once again, we have the war. Remember, you got to remember this when you're reading the Bible. The war is these spiritual beings, these Elohim, the evil ones that have fallen from God, trying to stop God's plan because they want to run the earth. And they know that the earth is God's prized possession. He loves people here. But they want to run it. So eventually, you see, God makes a covenant with Abraham. Now, in Deuteronomy, it says he gave all the nations of the world. Deuteronomy, I think it's 14, 15, 16, somewhere on there. Let me look for that real quick. He gave over all the nations of the world to these sons of God. And he said, but for my peace, it's going to be Israel. So God chose a nation for himself that didn't exist. And then he went and he talked to Abraham, and he made a covenant with Abraham. And the story of Abraham, all right? So God made a promise and said, your people are going to be prisoners in Egypt, slaves in Egypt for 400 years. But after everything is, I like how he says, after the sins of this certain nation have come to completion, like it's literally that whole thing that whatever's going on somewhere else in the world is over. He's like, your people are going to come to this land. Well, all of these fallen angels, all of these, fallen, spiritual beings, they would have known, this is the land where this seed's going to be born. Let's send some giants. And then, once, like I said, follow the beats of the story. You have Moses leaving Egypt. They get out into the wilderness. They send the 12 spies out, and Joshua and Caleb, and they go into the land, and they see, they bring back like grapes that are like the size of humans or something. I don't know. They're like, this land is amazing. It's wonderful. But they're giants and they eat people. That's actually what it says. Because the Septuagint, Joshua and Caleb go out and they see what's going on, including these other spies. Well, the 10 of the spies are like, there's no way we can, they're giants. What are we going to do? And Joshua and Caleb were like, but God told us to do it, and probably heard the story from Moses. Moses is like, yeah, here's some more of these Nephilim. I guess we're going to have to get rid of them. And so when you read the story of Joshua and the conquest of Canaan, if you believe that the conquest of Canaan and Joshua taking over, the Israelites, going into Canaan and taking that land over, if you actually think that they were just regular people there, that God wanted to genocide, I guess, would be the word. That's really what you see happening, is that Joshua and Caleb go in there and they go to town. And it wasn't, and this is what's interesting. They literally rid the land of all the giants, except for one mountain, one very, very important mountain, Mount Hermon. And it says that there was one spot that they left that they did not finish the job. They didn't continue going and beating all these different giants. And that's where there was a haven still left of the sons of Gath. And you probably know that story. So as time goes on, you have this little area where there's still some giants. And God has now promised that this kingly line of David, you're going to have the seed coming. And this, here's his children. Well, what do you see? You see Goliath show up, a giant. Now, I believe, this is my opinion, I believe that David and his mighty men, which is an amazing story. Once again, there's awesome stories in the Bible like this. David and his mighty men, that's what he called them, as a group of these guys. David killed Goliath, but it said Goliath had, I think, four brothers? There's four brothers. And all of his mighty men went and finished off the rest of them. So they rid the land of the Nephilim. There's an interesting story where they go into a town and in the Old Testament, the way it says it is kind of confusing unless you go back and read it. Some interpreters have interpreted that when they had beaten this certain town, they laid out all the people, and God said to kill every third person or something weird like that. And I'm like, wow, that's dark. That's not what happened. He said to kill everybody over 9 feet. So that would obviously not be a regular human. The measurement standard that's used there was not used as every third. It was literally like 3 times. It's 9 feet is what it ended up being. Like if they're this much bigger, then get rid of them. So David and his mighty men finished off all of these giants. They're dead. They're gone. And then you've got something really, really interesting that Jesus says. Now, he says, when the end comes, he says it's going to be like the days of Noah. For in the days of Noah, people were giving into marriage and taking in marriage and eating and drinking and, and all the way up to the day that the ark doors were closed and Noah and his family took off. What does that mean? Something else. I talk about this in my new book. In my new book, Puppies and Napalm, I have a chapter called Daniel Warned Us About Aliens. Daniel has this interesting thing when he interprets, and this actually came from Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and that God gave him. And Daniel knew the dream. God gave him the revelation of the dream and then the interpretation. I'm not going to go the ins and outs of it, but it's the story about the giant statue. Each part of the, each level of the statue had a different type of metal, all the way down to where the feet, it says, were iron mixed with clay. And I like how it says, they will try to mix with the seed of men, but will be unable to. So there's the seed of men, humans, and something else. Something else trying to mix with the genetic properties of man. Yeah, that's weird. That's weird. But when you put the two together, well, Jesus said it was going to be like the days of Noah. Well, what was happening before the days of Noah? I do not want to even imagine a world like that. And then you have this story of this final kingdom, the feet of the statue that Daniel is the final kingdom, because the rock, who's Jesus, will come and destroy the feet. The whole statue is going to fall down. But the rock, Jesus, and not the rock. He called him the rock in this story. But it's going to destroy the statue and it's all going to fall down. One of the things that is interesting about this story is that it's talking about an end time and a time in the future. And we live in a time that's really, really interesting where people are very, very cautious about what they say about aliens because there's a lot of fake stuff. But what if 2% of what if 1% of it is there's something there? It doesn't have to be from another planet. I believe that we live in a world, a 3-dimensional world, but within our world, there are multiple dimensions that we don't have access to. When scientists have observed, leptons and all these weird exotic molecules disappearing and appearing in different places, or doing all this weird stuff, they're like, they have to be traveling through either an alternate universe or another dimension that we just don't have access to. Jesus, when he rose from the dead, his new body, he was able to appear and disappear inside of a house. He was able to fly up into heaven. But he was able to eat food. And he told the disciples, he's like, touch me. I'm a real person. So I think what's interesting about that is that I believe that there are extra dimensions, the ones that we can't reach, that like God, Jesus, some of these Elohim probably live in. And that one day we will have that same ability. But the important part of it is that right now there's a lot of weird stuff going on. A lot of weird stuff. And I'm one of those people that I always like paying attention to the weird stuff. And because like I said, with the Bible, if you don't pay attention to the weird stuff and really dig into it, then you're going to think God is a genocidal murderer. But he's not. He's trying to take care of his kids. And that's something that I think is the most important message in this whole thing. So I'm going to be finishing up here in a second. This whole thing is a story, and that's what you got to remember. Don't get caught up on all the little, if you don't understand something, maybe it's a cultural thing. Maybe it's a historical thing. Maybe the interpreters chose a weird word, for that certain thing. I mean, nothing wrong with that. I mean, go back, study it yourself. The word that Paul used to Timothy when he said, study to show yourself approved, a workman who does not need to be ashamed and rightly divides the word of truth. That word used there for divide is it's the word that we get exegesis, which is you go into the scriptures and you extract what you could, where you're looking at the history, you're looking at the culture, you're looking at the language, you're looking at all of those things. And you're not just looking at it from a American English speaking, way. I mean, it's just, our world is nothing like the world that Jesus lived in, the apostles and all of them. And so when you read the Bible, take time to really look into it. If there's something you don't understand, don't give up. Really search it out. And if you're going to criticize the Bible, like I was talking earlier with Lord of the Rings, make sure you read it first. And make sure that your criticisms, because I will be right there with you. I am a very realistic person. I have no problem having conversations with God about things that don't make sense to me. And if I see something that I don't understand in the Bible, like Romans 13, that's where I got started talking in this whole thing. I don't understand it. I'm still trying to figure it out. I figured the more that I talk about it, maybe I can figure some things out. Maybe other people might talk about it. But ultimately, there are things in the Bible that are really hard, and you've got to spend some time study them and figure out what the person's trying to say before you make a judgment. And that's what I'm saying. And before you start judging God as being a genocidal murderer, remember, this is a story from the beginning to the end. And there are beats in the story. And if you miss the beats, you miss the story. The beats are very important, because if you miss the beats, you miss the story. And when you read the Bible, read it like that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with reading it like a fictional book. Don't get so caught up. And there's going to be some weird stuff in here, especially if you start in Genesis, because eventually you're going to get to Leviticus and you're going to go, wow. And you probably won't want to keep going. Or maybe somewhere in Numbers when they start talking about how many people are in each tribe. But you got to keep going, because those are things that were important to the ancient people. All these things that we read and we're like, why is that in there? It was important to them. It was something very important to them. And so don't be so quick to judge. Take time to figure out if what you actually think about the Bible or what you actually think about these things, is it just, maybe you don't like church. Amen. I'll agree with you. Maybe you don't like, maybe people in the Christian world have hurt you, have said something mean to you, or, I don't know. Don't judge all Christians, because not all Christians are the same. I'm a Christian, absolutely, 100%. And I absolutely am completely different than most Christians that go to church. And because I believe in a God of love, I can't get away from that. I see a story of a lover pursuing his love. I don't see anything else. I don't see a murderer. I don't see a genocidal, homicidal maniac that likes to torture kids in the basement with fire. I don't see any of that. I don't. I see a loving God. And I see a loving God from the beginning to the end. And I see a loving God that's not going to give up on us. He will save everybody. Every single person that's ever been born, the blood of Jesus paid for their salvation. And God will find a way to get to everyone. So if you have some weird Christian try to tell you that somebody died and they're probably in hell and you'll never see them again, you can just dismiss them as an idiot. Not because you think their religion's a myth. That's how a lot of people would dismiss it. But because of what they're telling you is tradition, it's old information, and it's obsolete. It's not what modern day Bible readers believe. We don't believe in that. I don't believe in hell. The way that other people believe in hell. I don't believe in eternal judgment. Eternal judgment doesn't make any sense. Why would you judge somebody, or why would you inflict punishment on someone for all eternity I mean, they're not going to change, right? Because you're just going to keep punishing them. I mean, that's a horrible thought. I mean, when I read in the Bible, when God punishes somebody, it's for a change, to bring them back. I love the example in Corinthians. So in the Corinthian church, you had a dude that was dating his stepmom. And all the people, and he was, walking in with her around, with his arm around her, like, hey, this is my girlfriend. And everybody's like, okay, dude. Now, you got to understand, this was, Roman days, and, there were certain Greek gods that had the same issues. But, yeah, Paul's like, dude, that's bad. you need to get that out. Because, yeah, that was weird. It's like, why are you dating your stepmom, dude? That's gross. And so Paul told them, turn him over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. The soul might be saved at the last day. What? How do I do that? He says, when the Spirit's here and when my spirit's there, you're going to turn this man over to Satan. It's like, whoa, that is some weird stuff. But he doesn't end there. In the 2 Corinthians, he tells the Corinthians, the guy repented, bring him back. Don't leave him outside to suffer on his own. Don't leave him to despair on his own. That's what eternal judgment is. I mean, there's no hope for redemption. Can a Christian really say can you really say Jesus is God? And then say, but Jesus can't do this. I'm not playing, semantics with you. I'm not can God make a rock so big that God can't? That's just stupid. I'm not talking about that. I want you to look at the life of Jesus, and I want you to tell me one time that displays that he was a homicidal murderer, that he wanted people to commit genocide. I want you to show me one place that Jesus said something that in some way would make you think that he's this evil monster like that. And he doesn't. He says nothing but love. The people that he was upset with were the Pharisees, were the religious leaders. He said, how will you escape being condemned? And he used the word hell. You know what that word means? Gehenna. Talking about the Valley of Hinnom, which was the dump right outside of Jerusalem. You know why John doesn't mention it in his gospel? Because it didn't exist anymore. Because John wrote his gospel after Jerusalem was destroyed. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that still existed. So when Jesus was talking about Gehenna, all of the people that were reading those books at the time would have said, oh yeah, I know, that's the dump outside. As he said, what the religious leaders, that's where they belonged. That's what he was saying. Your religion's garbage. Throw it away. It belongs in the dump. It's not helping anybody. And you know what? Maybe God's saying that to us today. Throw away your garbage. Get rid of your religion. It doesn't belong here. It belongs in the dump. I love the prophet Amos. He said, get away from me with the sound of your songs. They tire me out. I'm tired of your praise. I'm tired of your sacrifices. Like God was telling him, I'm through with you guys because I want justice. I want justice to roll down. And this is awesome, Martin Luther. Martin Luther King quoted this, but I'm using it right now because I want to prove a point here, is that God does not belong to the church. God does not belong to this group of people called Christians. God is a lot bigger than that. And God was upset at the people of Amos's time because they did not show justice. Is it just and right to tell somebody that their family is in hell because they didn't believe the way you believe, that they didn't go to the church that you go to? Is that just? Is that right? Is that right to strap some poor Muslim person who might have decided to convert to Christianity, but you're going to tell them the rest of their family's burning in hell right now? I'm sorry, we've got to stop that. That has to change. Absolutely has to change, and has to change right away. And so I'm finishing with that. Thank you guys for listening today. Thank you for listening to what I had to say. If you have any questions or anything that I didn't talk about on this live, make sure you send me your comments. Just send me a thing through the inbox. I'll check it out. I'll cover it the next time I do a live. And remember to pick up my book, Adam is God, Eve is Us, and my upcoming book in the summer, Puppies and Napalm, The Extra-Dimensional Madness of the Prophets. I think you'll like it if you like the weird stuff like I do. And I'll see you next time.